Welcome to another episode of Musings. I'm Amrita Ghosh, and today's episode is on dying languages. We today have someone with us who traveled to various remote areas of Pakistan in search of a dying language. Welcome, Dr. Sadaf Munshi, Professor and Chair, Department of Linguistics, University of North Texas. Dr. Munshi was born and raised in Srinagar, in the Indian-administered state, of Kashmir, where she received most of her earlier education. She headed to the United States in 2001 to pursue a doctoral degree in linguistics at the University of Texas at Austin. She completed doctorate in 2006. And Dr. Munshi's research focuses on documenting endangered languages in India and Pakistan. The two contentious neighbors engaged in continued political tension. The larger goal of her research is to build lasting collaborations, infrastructure, and capacity in these areas, which pose a number of social, political, and cultural challenges, including obstacles. Aside from her academic achievements, Dr. Munshi is a prolific poet, columnist, and social critic who writes in Kashmiri, English, and Urdu. She has published numerous articles on various topics related to Kashmiri society and culture, language, politics, and gender. Her social and political critiques and her personal accounts on a wide range of topics have appeared in various publications in print, such as Kashmir Observer, Rising Kashmir, Kashmir Times, Greater Kashmir Economic and Political Weekly, Scroll.in, and Huffington Post, amongst others. Besides creative writing and poetry, Dr. Munshi has a great passion for painting. A self-taught and accomplished artist, she has produced numerous pieces of art in oil, watercolor, and multimedia. A solo exhibition of her paintings was held at Jammu and Kashmir Academy of Art, Culture and Languages in 2014, the first of its kind by a woman artist in the state. A very warm welcome to you, Dr. Munshi.
Thank you very much, Amrita. I'm very glad to be here today with you.
So I'm going to start with this pursuit of endangered languages. And because I and also perhaps some of our viewers don't know, tell us about the Burushaski language, its significance, and why you chose to travel all the way for this particular language.
Thank you. My work on Burushaski started when I was a graduate student at UT Austin. I was in my second year of my doctoral degree. It wasn't my first choice. I was wanting to work on another language called Shina, and which is also a dying language. I wanted to go to Kargil, but there was a lot of tension in that area at that time. And soon after, so I was not allowed to travel to that area. Soon after I got married and I had a chance to visit my husband, who was then in Iran in 2002. And I just basically came across a speaker of this language, Burushaski language, who was from my hometown, Srinagar. And I asked him, what is your language? What is the language that you speak? And he didn't know the name of the language. He said, I don't know what it is called. I'm not sure if it's even a language. It's probably a Boli or something. I think it's called Gilgiti or something like that. So I got very curious and I started researching about this language. I wanted to know more about it because I knew that he lived in the heart of Srinagar in an area called Kathi Darwaza. And I got really curious. I wanted to know these people. So I called my dad and asked him to collect some words for me. That's how I started working on this language. I really wanted to look at how this language had reached there, how did it arrive there, and what happened to the language over the years that it was there.
Thank you. And my second question is sort of related to what you just said. And you're yourself from the conflicted space of Kashmir. And one does not really get to hear so much from the other side of the border. So do Kashmiris on either side speak Burushaski and Koshur both? And of course, Urdu is spoken too. And why is this particular language that you are researching considered an isolate language?
So Burushaski in Srinagar is spoken by about 300 or 350 people, roughly. And all of them live in one small locality, and are basically family members, extended family members. And their forefather, who came to Srinagar in around 1890, was the king of the British, of the Gilgit Agency during the Dogra War. So he was basically arrested along with his family members and entourage and brought to Srinagar and put under arrest in the fort. And then eventually they settled there. It was about 20 people at that time, very close family members and some other people who were working for them. So they spoke Burushaski, probably a dialect of a subdialect, a dialect of Nagar Burushaski, because they were from Nagar, which is currently in Pakistan. So they are the descendants of Raja Azur Khan. They continued. It was very intriguing. They continued to speak their language over the years. They did not want to give up their language. My research focuses on not only my initial research focused on how they were able to maintain their language and how they were able to continue to speak their language while in a majority Kashmiri speaking area. So the majority language in Kashmir is Kashmiri, and Urdu is the state official language. So they speak Urdu as their second language, and Kashmiri. Many of them speak Kashmiri, mostly men who are more go around more and more interact more with the Kashmiri community. So men are more fluent in Kashmiri, almost equally fluent as Kashmiri speakers, almost like native speakers. So often they have been, sometimes they've been treated as people don't really talk about Burushaski language. Many people didn't even know that there was this language in Srinagar. So I guess my study was the first of its kind in terms of discovering this small group of people speaking this language and doing linguistic research on it. Mm. The reason it is called isolate, the language is called isolate, is because it has not been, a lot of research has been done on its relationship, its possible relationship with any other language in the world, but we don't have any convincing data that indicates that it is closely related to any of the languages that we know of so far. There have been many attempts to relate it to various other languages, but we don't have any convincing evidence yet which indicates that it's related to any other language.
That's absolutely fascinating, because my next question was exactly on that. Do we know the origins of the Burushaski language? And the speakers of the language, as you mentioned, from the remote areas of Pakistan and also in Kashmir itself, on the Indian side of Kashmir, what kind of identity do the speakers hold on to? Do they claim themselves in an identification with this language especially, or with the nation states that they kind of live under, even if conflicted?
I think they have a very positive attitude towards their language. They do, especially on the Indian side, because they are a very small, minuscule minority in Srinagar, in Kashmir. A very, very small neighborhood. So they are very, especially the older generation, they are very aware of their linguistic identity, and they are also aware of the fact that this language could die. So there are attempts they make sure that they speak the language, at least at home. So their children speak their language. Even though there's immense pressure of Urdu and Kashmiri, but they have tried to maintain their language, which is very fascinating, because the general trend is shifting to Urdu. So there's a lot of pressure on the younger generation. But earlier you had asked me how I expanded to probably to Pakistan, why I got because the parent community was in Pakistan. So I wanted to extend my research to the other side. And because it was very difficult to travel to the other side, I really wanted to take that challenge to go and meet the people on the other side. And it was my personal attempt to kind of build bridges across the two sides.
Mm. Thank you. And, I'm interested in the form of the language. Is it completely oral, or is there written form of it? And also, is it a gendered language like Urdu and Hindi as well? What are the possibilities, despite your work right now, that it could be extinct?
I'm sorry, the first
part. Break it down. So is there a written form of it, or is it completely oral?
It is primarily an orally spoken language. Most of the literature that is available is very, very recent, and they don't have a standardized writing system yet. So several attempts have been made by scholars, local scholars, especially on the Pakistani side, to write down the language. They have there is some poetry, and there's some other literature, also translations of Quran in Hunza. There is one translation of Quran in the Hunza dialect. But there are more than one writing proposals for writing systems. There is no standardized writing system yet. So it's been a kind of contentious issue between speakers of different dialects. There has been no institutional support for the language so far, or very, very little, especially on the Pakistani. On the Indian side, this language did not even exist, sort of. So that's a challenge. It's not primarily, it's an orally spoken language. However, there is a word for writing in the language, which is very interesting. Even though we don't have much literature, old literature in the language, most of the literature is just very, very recently published by contemporary writers. But there is a word for writing. So probably it was written at some point, but we don't have any records. So there is guesswork on that end.
Fascinating. And is this also a gendered language like?
Yes, it is. It does have, it does have gender, and it is actually more morphologically more complex than Indian Urdu in terms of its linguistic structure. It's more complex.
And your work is currently obviously pursuing and documenting, and I'm guessing training people in excavating this language or researching the language. But is there potential that it could become extinct?
I'm hopeful that it won't be extinct because there is a lot of awareness among the speakers of the language, and the younger generation are trying to write down. So hopefully I'm in communication with many people who are speakers of this language. I'm really very concerned about its future. So they are trying to make attempts that this language does not get extinct. But we will see. Language death is a matter of 2 to 3 generations. So it depends on how much support it will get at institutional level. Institutional support is extremely important for the language and language prestige. If there is a notion of language prestige among the speakers and this concern about its future, then the speakers can preserve it.
So this is very interesting to me in how you're explaining the current situation and also the impact towards the future. Could you tell us about the broader impacts of your work, not just in this language, but I think you're also pursuing other endangered languages, the Mankiali language, for example. Could you talk to us about that?
Yes. So my initial research was a doctoral dissertation that was on finding how this dialect or sub-dialect of Burushaski spoken in Srinagar had changed and evolved because of contact with Kashmiri and Urdu. And then I extended my research to the Pakistani side, and I wanted to look at the differences between the dialects. There are 3 main dialects. One is called the Yasin dialect, spoken in the Yasin Valley of Gilgit-Baltistan region of Pakistan. And then there's Hunza dialect and Nagar dialect. The dialect that is spoken in Srinagar is a sub-dialect of the Nagar variety of this language. So I wanted to look at the differences and similarities, but also document this language because uh, even though there was quite a bit of literature on the Pakistani dialect, but it was not of the kind that we call documentation materials, especially in the contemporary field of documentary linguistics. It was not the type of literature that we recommend for documentation and preservation. Most of the literature that was available on this language was in German and French, and it was not accessible to the population. So I wanted to make sure that my documentation materials on the language are accessible. We have them; they are digitally accessible. They are accessible on internet, and the people that they are accessible to a wider audience. So we have an archival materials. We have the digital collections, a huge corpus of literature on this language, visual, audio, and text in different formats for different types of audiences, both linguists and non-linguists who can study this language and the culture from a variety of different perspectives. So that was one thing. But while also doing that research, I have trained native speakers of this language and involved them in my research project, which was continuing research over time, funded by the National Science Foundation several times. So we have native speakers of all of these dialects involved in the project who were trained in documentation methods and working on this language. And we still have at one student right now here at the University of North Texas who's working here as a graduate student who's still working on this language. So it's a continuing process. Each language, working on each language, it's like a lifetime project. So it's a lifetime investment. So while working on Gulshasvi, I started thinking about training more and more people, especially on the Pakistani side, because that area is really underrepresented in terms of language documentation and research on languages, endangered languages, or the field of linguistics itself. They are really still in a fledgling stage of this field. So I wanted to focus more and more on training native speakers of different languages in documenting their own language so that it is a more efficient and more effective process in the longer term. It is it's more efficient for native speakers to document their own languages. It makes more sense. So I started a new project recently, about 2 years ago, in collaboration with more people and involving more people. So the focus of this one is to document a language called Mankiali, which is a very, very minority language spoken by a small number of people. The total number of speakers is 500. And it's completely undocumented language. It was not even in the list of world languages until 2017.
Where is it spoken?
It is spoken in a very remote area of northern areas of Pakistan in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, in the Bandi Shumli district, Mansehra, in the Mansehra district, in a very remote, small. There are two villages. Primarily, one of them is Danna, and there's another village called Demeka. So we traveled to those areas. I traveled to those areas, and I have native speakers in the project who were brought here as visiting scholars for about 6 months. We trained them. I also did training workshops in Pakistan, in various places in Pakistan, in Islamabad. I've done workshops in Chitral. I've traveled to Chitral. I've traveled to various remote areas in Pakistan, trying to train people and do workshops on language documentation and orthography development and other issues related to language documentation.
Thank you. And to wrap up, you began talking about your work as a collaboration and also building bridges. And you've traveled so far and wide remotely to various parts of the other side of the border to Pakistan. So if there's one thing you would share through your travels that you can tell us how it could share a sort of collaborative or building of the bridges, what would that be? Anything that you remember and can share?
It has been, yes, thank you. That's a very good question, and it's a very difficult question also. So building bridges has been my core factor in or core motivation in this research, because having been born and brought up in Kashmir and having seen the conflict so up close and experienced it so up close, it has been not only been a challenge but also an achievement for me to be working on this project. Um, I took it as a challenge and I took it as a goal to work on in this area, because I wanted to cross this barrier, this political barrier, and I wanted to bring people together, even if it's a small number of people, but working on projects that have long-term effects. So traveling to that area was really difficult in the beginning, because getting a visa was a nightmare. So I had to apply several times. At that time, I was still an Indian citizen, and I had to make years of attempts. So it took me 3 years to get my visa, first visa um, approved. But it got easier over the years. There were many episodes that happened over the time, and it was a learning experience for me. But it's really a reward for me, a rewarding experience to be able to have people from both sides of the border working on this project with me, or working on these projects with me. I have worked with people on from the Indian side and people from the Pakistani side, and I currently have people from both sides working on this project, the Mankiali project, and as well as the ongoing work on Burshasti and Kashmiri as well, which is my native language, which I should not forget. So we have people and American students. My American students are the core part of this team. So I have American students and colleagues who have worked on this project with me, and they have traveled with me in my recent trips to Pakistan. And I hope to continue that in the near future.
Thank you so much, Sadaf. This was a fascinating conversation.
Thank you very much.